There are encounters that seem to be a coincidence, but that change entire destinies. Imagine a widowed millionaire father struggling to take care of his young daughter amidst grief and a chaotic routine. He has money, status, and a luxury apartment, but no peace, no lap, no time. At the height of his despair, he meets in the most unlikely place, a supermarket, a simple woman with an apron on her chest and a smile on her face, who, without knowing it, begins to stitch together the broken pieces of his life. This story is not about material wealth, but about the things that really matter: care, presence, trust, and life transformation. Her name is Marina, a loving nanny, maybe, but above all, someone who sees beyond appearances. And that's where beauty lies, when someone from the outside comes in and can see what we forgot to look for. Today, you're going to hear one of the most moving stories we've ever told here. A story about emotional reconnection, loss, second chances, and most importantly, true love, the kind that rebuilds families and heals deep wounds. Get ready. This isn't just a story, it's a mirror for anyone who's ever felt fear, loneliness, or had to relearn how to trust. Lucas was a man used to solving everything, with numbers, contracts, and quick decisions. A widowed millionaire father who dominated the business world but found himself completely lost in the aisles of a supermarket with his little daughter in tears. Sophia, just 3 years old, was his world, but also his biggest challenge since the loss of his wife. The scene was chaotic. Diapers falling, a broken cell phone, judgmental looks from strangers. And in the midst of this emotional collapse, a sweet voice appeared. "Can I help you?" This woman was Marina. She wore a blue apron and had a disconcerting calm in her brown eyes. Amidst the chaos, she was the only one who didn't judge, criticize, or turn her face away. She simply offered help without expecting anything in return. While Lucas, desperate, tried to contain Sophia's tears, Marina took her in her arms so naturally that, as if by magic, the girl fell silent. It was as if she had been sent by someone from above, and perhaps she really was. What seemed like a trivial moment, a supermarket employee offering help, was actually a turning point. A simple but rare gesture, offering presence when the other person is broken. Lucas, accustomed to refusing any help, had no choice. In that moment, Marina was not just a helpful employee. She was a shelter, and like every silent new beginning, it begins like this, with unexpected help that changes everything. Lucas wasn't the kind of man who asked for help, much less twice. But 3 weeks after the meeting at the supermarket, life put him against the wall. The babysitter was absent, the kindergarten closed, and his corporate schedule was non-stop. With an important presentation approaching and Sophia restless, he looked in the drawer and found the paper with Marina's number. He hesitated, but he called. And to his surprise, she answered with a smile in her voice, and with the same calmness as before. Marina arrived without a uniform, but with the same welcoming presence. She brought simple toys, colorful books, and homemade modeling clay. Sophia, who had been crying non-stop, smiled when she saw her, and Lucas, once again, was disarmed. She was not just a loving nanny. She was someone who understood the silence of the children and the confusion of the adults. Within minutes, the house was breathing again. It was as if Marina knew exactly what to do, effortlessly, without a manual. It was then that Lucas began to see something more. Marina's help wasn't just practical, it was emotional. She didn't just take care of Sophia, but she also transmitted a kind of peace he hadn't known since the loss of his wife. It was subtle, like someone who just does what needs to be done, but it was powerful. That day, he understood that certain encounters change everything, and that sometimes what saves is not the extraordinary, but the simple gesture of someone who chooses to stay. Lucas's routine was marked by deadlines, goals, and unavoidable meetings. Sophia's was marked by frequent crying, sleepless nights, and the lack of a constant figure who knew how to interpret her silences, until Marina arrived. Little by little, she took on an invisible but essential role. that of bringing order and warmth to an apartment that seemed more like a museum of sad memories. She put away toys, folded small clothes, prepared soups that reminded her of affection, and all of this without fanfare, as if it were just part of what life should be. Lucas, accustomed to solving problems with money, began to realize that there were things that not all his wealth could buy, like seeing his daughter eat without resistance, sleep without crying, laugh when tickled. It was as if Marina had access to a language that he had never learned. And this difference, instead of bothering him, made him admire even more that simple woman who understood much more about the soul than about luxury. Without realizing it, Lucas began to look forward to the days when Marina would come, not only for Sophia's sake, but for his own. It was as if the house breathed differently when she was there. She brought the lightness he had lost in mourning. She transformed everyday life into something bearable, and more than that, into something beautiful. Marina did not replace Helena, his deceased wife. She brought something new, and perhaps without knowing it, she was inaugurating the first step towards rebuilding a family. Talking about Helena was like stepping on broken glass. Lucas avoided it, not out of indifference, but out of fear of being shattered again. Ever since he became a widower, he had shielded his own pain with silence, thinking that this would also protect his daughter. But Marina saw beyond that. One day, when she saw Sophia curiously looking at a photo of her mother in her room, she sat down next to the girl and told her stories about a brave, beautiful and loving woman. She didn't invent anything. She simply gave words to what Lucas couldn't say. When he found out, he was shocked. Not out of jealousy, but out of gratitude. Marina had said exactly what he wished he had had the strength to say. For the first time, someone was talking about Helena without overwhelming sadness, and it opened up a new space between father and daughter. That night, Lucas sat next to the crib and repeated with a choked voice the words he had heard from Marina. "Your mommy loved you very much, and so did Daddy." Sophia smiled in her sleep, and in that moment, Lucas understood the power of emotional reconnection. These simple but profound conversations began to heal wounds that seemed eternal. Marina didn't make speeches or try to fix anyone. She just listened, welcomed, and said what was necessary, and that made all the difference. Lucas felt that grief no longer dominated him. Now, there was room to remember Helena with love, not just with pain. And all of this because of a woman who, one day, extended her arms to him in a supermarket. As the weeks went by, Lucas realized that it wasn't just Sophia who was smiling more. He himself had started to laugh at little things, to pay attention to details, to linger in conversations. Marina, with her simple and direct manner, had become more than just a loving nanny. She was a transformative presence. When she laughed, the room took on a different color. When she spoke, even the most ordinary subjects gained depth. Lucas, accustomed to women who were enchanted by his bank account, now found himself enchanted by someone who was not impressed by any of that. He decided to invite her to dinner, not to impress, but to thank her, and perhaps to be close to her outside the walls of the apartment. Marina hesitated, but accepted. She arrived wearing a dark blue dress and her hair down, visibly uncomfortable with the luxurious atmosphere of the restaurant. Even so, she maintained her firm posture. There, amidst sophisticated dishes and the looks of others, she revealed more about herself, her degree in education, the dreams postponed because of her mother's illness, and the simple desire to one day open a nursery school. Lucas listened silently, absorbing not only the words but Marina's entire world. She didn't want pity, nor miracles. She wanted respect and truth, and the more he listened, the more he admired her. He realized that his feelings were growing silently but steadily. It was no longer just about gratitude. It was something more, something that blossomed there, in the honesty of a conversation where no one had to pretend to be something they were not. Despite the obvious connection between them, Marina kept her feet on the ground. She knew that different worlds carry different weights, and that love is not always enough to bridge social classes. Marina liked Lucas. She had already suspected that, but she was also afraid. She was afraid of not belonging. She was afraid of the judgmental looks, the mean comments, the way people measure someone's worth by the neighborhood they live in or the job they do. It was a real fear, experienced firsthand, that made her keep her emotional distance. She expressed this clearly after dinner. She said bluntly that she didn't know if what he felt was love or just disguised gratitude. And what's more, she was afraid of getting involved and then losing Sophia if something went wrong between them. Lucas heard it all with a heavy heart. He, a widowed father, accustomed to making firm decisions, found himself vulnerable in the face of the delicate refusal of a woman who only wanted to protect her own sanity and the child she already considered part of her. Lucas tried to argue, to promise that he would face anything for them, but Marina stood her ground. She needed emotional security, not promises made in the midst of enthusiasm. It wasn't pride, it was self-defense. And at that point, he understood. Sometimes those who live through loss learn to build walls. And love, in this context, requires double courage. The silence that remained between them after this conversation wasn't hostile, but charged with everything they still needed to understand about each other. Doubt, when planted in the soil of fear, grows quickly. And that's exactly what happened when Beatrice, Lucas's assistant, decided to investigate Marina on her own. Armed with good intentions, but tainted by social prejudice, she brought photos of Marina leaving a law firm specializing in family cases. For Beatrice, this was a clear sign of ulterior motives. For Lucas, it was like pouring gasoline on an insecurity he thought he had overcome. Even though he was reluctant, Lucas confronted Marina. He showed her the photos. He asked her questions coldly. He demanded explanations. And for the first time, he saw Marina's eyes fill with hurt. She didn't shout. She didn't defend herself angrily. She just told the truth. She was helping her sister with a complicated custody and alimony case. What's more, she had also sought out a lawyer to understand how to legally protect Sophia in case something happened to him. The widowed father, who always thought he could handle everything, had never thought of that. The penny dropped like a punch. Lucas realized the size of the mistake he had made. The woman who had helped his daughter the most was now viewed with suspicion, not because of anything she had done, but because of who she was. Marina, with her dignity wounded, decided to leave. And Lucas, a millionaire surrounded by comfort, felt miserable. The distrust was not born of her. It was born of him. And that day, more than losing the chance to experience true love, he almost lost the only person who had managed to bring a smile to his daughter's face. Marina's farewell was not marked by shouting or arguments. It was silent, hard, painful. She only came back to pack Sophia's things and say goodbye. The apartment, which had been full of life during the days she was there, seemed colder than ever. Lucas tried to explain, to justify himself, to promise that it was just an error of judgment. But Marina didn't want to listen. She was hurt, not by pride, but by having been treated as a suspect when, in fact, she only wanted to protect. Lucas spent the night awake. He relived in his mind every detail of his time with Marina, every small gesture of affection towards Sophia, every meal prepared with love. And the more he thought about it, the more he felt the weight of loss. The distrust had corroded something precious. The next morning he spoke to Beatrice. He firmly told her that the mistake had been serious, and what's more, that the company would no longer tolerate any form of judgment based on origin or social class. It was a lesson he had learned the hard way. Sophia, too young to understand the whole situation, simply asked, "Where's Nana?" And that hurt Lucas more than any accusation. Because deep down, he knew that Marina hadn't just left him. She had left his daughter's life too, and it wasn't fair. That simple woman who had appeared at the supermarket with a smile and a name tag had conquered a space that no other had been able to occupy. Losing her was more than a mistake. It was a consequence that he might never be able to fix. 8 days passed as if they were an eternity. Lucas, accustomed to controlling everything, found himself powerless. Messages were not being answered. Connections went to voicemail. Marina had disappeared from the routine and left a void that was hard to fill, until finally the phone rang. On the other end of the line, a familiar voice. "Can we talk? But in person." Lucas could barely hide his relief and his fear. "Because I didn't know if it was a reunion or a definitive goodbye." They met at a cafe in the city center, far from the luxurious gaze and judgments of his world. Marina arrived with her usual simplicity. Jeans, ponytail, and that serene look that always said more than any speech. She was direct. She had missed him too, Sophia, and him. But she admitted that for a long time she was the one who put up barriers, afraid of getting hurt, afraid of creating deep bonds in a world where she perhaps had no place. Lucas didn't try to romanticize things. He just asked for a chance, a real chance, with patience, respect, and transparency. He said he didn't want to go back to what they had before. He wanted to build something new. Marina, with tears in her eyes, listened to everything in silence. And then, in a low voice, she said what he had been waiting so long to hear. "I miss you too, Lucas." It wasn't enough, but it was everything. The new beginning didn't come wrapped in exaggerated promises. It came here, in a simple cafe, with two people trying to make it work. After that conversation at the cafe, things started to fall into place, slowly, as they should. Marina returned to visit Sophia, but now without the burden of obligations or uncertainties. She came by choice, and that changed everything. Lucas, on the other hand, did not make the same mistakes. He showed with simple gestures that he was willing to build something carefully. He did not rush, he did not pressure. He was simply present, and, for the first time since the loss of Helena, he felt that his heart was beating for something new and true. It was then that he decided to go a step further, not on impulse, but out of conviction. On a Sunday afternoon, with the sun streaming onto the apartment balcony, Lucas knelt before Marina. He took a little box out of his pocket and made his proposal. He wanted her to share her life with him and Sophia, officially. The ring was simple, but full of meaning. It represented not the end of a love story, but the beginning of a new phase, of reconstruction, of family. Marina cried, she laughed, and she hesitated, but not out of fear, out of respect for what she felt. She made one single demand, that this moment be understood not as a happy fairy tale ending, but as a beginning, a commitment to reality, to everyday life, to the ups and downs. And Lucas moved, not only accepted, but promised. Sophia, upon seeing the ring on Marina's finger, celebrated as if she already knew. "I knew it! We're a family!" she said, jumping for joy. And there, in that three-way hug, the past gave way to hope. Life with Marina didn't turn into a fairy tale, and thank goodness. It turned into something much more solid, a shared daily routine. She continued working at the supermarket, as she had done before, not out of necessity, but by choice. She wanted to maintain her independence, her schedule, her essence. Lucas respected her and admired her even more. While many expected her to adapt to his world, Marina showed that she could bring hers with lightness, simplicity, and a lot of love into that luxurious apartment that was finally starting to become a home. Of course, not everything was rosy. There were sideways glances at events, veiled comments from Lucas's colleagues, and even disguised resistance from some friends. But Marina never backed down. When asked how she managed to deal with social prejudice, she would smile and say, "Because I know who I am, and I know who's waiting for me at home." This, more than any statement, made Lucas's heart beat faster. He realized that what attracted him most to her was not what she said, but how she lived, with truth, courage, and dignity. Little by little, Sophia gained what every child deserves: stability, affection, routine, and laughter. And Lucas, what he didn't even know he needed: a true love, who wasn't impressed by wealth, but was moved by a tower of blocks, built on the living room carpet. That apartment, previously cold and silent, now pulsed with life. The smell of cake, the sound of children's stories, voices mingling in the kitchen. It was a new beginning, but not just for Lucas, for all of them. In the end, it's not about the luxury of your apartment, your bank balance, or the most expensive restaurant in town. It's about who holds your hand when everything seems to be falling apart. It's about who sees you disheveled, tired, broken, and still chooses to stay. The story of Lucas, Marina, and Sophia reminds us that the greatest transformations happen in the simplest moments: a hug in the midst of chaos, a soup made with love, a silence respected at the right time. What about you? Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever had to trust someone who appeared in your life unexpectedly? Or are you now being called to give someone, or yourself, a second chance? Think about it. Because sometimes life only changes direction when we allow someone else to come in, even through the most unlikely doors. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our exciting stories. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if you were in Marina's place when Lucas suspected her? Your opinion is very important and can inspire others. Until the next video, and may we never run out of second chances.